Okay, Nathan, hit it.
ודוד, אל תתחר במרעים, אל תקנא בעושה עוולה, כי חציר מהרה ימלאו, וכירק דשא יבולון. פתח באדוני ועשה טוב, שכון ארץ וראה אמונה. והתענג על אדוני, ויתן לך משאלות ליבך, גול על אדוני דרכך, ובטח עליו, הוא יעשה, והוציאך אור צדקך ומשפטך, כצהריים. דום לאדוני ויתחולל לו, אל תתחר במצליח דרכו באיש עושה מזימות, הרף מאף ועזוב חמא, אל תתחר אך להרע, כי מרעים יכרתון, וקובע אדוני המה ירשו הארץ. ועוד מעט ואין רשע, והתבוננת על מקומו ואיננו, וענבים ירשו ארץ והתענגו. הרוב שלום צומם רשע לצדיק, חורק עליו שיניו. אדוני ישחק לו כי ראה, כי יבוא יומו, חרב פתחו רשעים, ודרכו קשתם, והפיל עני ואביון לטבוח ישרי דרך, חרבם תבוא וליבם, וקשתותם תשברנה. טוב מעט לצדיק מהמון רשעים רבים, כי זרועות רשעים תשברנה. סומך צדיקים אדוני, יודע אדוני ימי תמימים, נחלתם לעולם תהיה, לא יבושו בעת רעה, וימי רעבון ישבעו, כי רשעים יובלו, ואויבי אדוני כקרקרים, כלו ועשן כלו. לווה רשע לא ישלם, וצדיק חונן ונותן, כי מברכיו ירשו הארץ, וכולליו יכרתו. מאדוני מצדי גבר כוננו, ודרכו יחפץ, כי פה לא יוטל, כי אדוני סומך ידו. נער הייתי גם זקנתי, לא ראיתי צדיק נעזב, וזרעו מבקש לחם, כל יום חונן ומלווה, וזרעו לברכה. סומרה ועשה טוב, ושכון לעולם, כי אדוני אוהב משפט, ולא יעזוב את חסידיו לעולם נשמרו, וזרע רשעים נכרת. צדיקים ירשו ארץ, ישכנו לעד עליה. פי צדיק יגה חכמה ולשונו, תדבר משפט, תורת אלוהיו בליבו, לא תמעד אשוריו. צופה רשע לצדיק ומבקש עמיתו, אדוני לא יעזבנו בידו, ולא ירשיענו בשפטו. קווה אל אדוני ושמור דרכו, ירוממך לרשת ארץ, יכרת רשעים תראה, ראית רשע עריץ מתערה, כאזרח רענן. יעבור והנה איננו, אבקשהו ולא נמצא, שמרתם וראה ישר, כי אחרית לאיש שלום, פושעים נשמדו יחדיו, אחרית רשעים נכרתה. ישועת צדיקים מאדוני מעוזם בעת צרה, ויעזרם אדוני ופעלתם, יפעלתם רשעים ויושעם, כי יכעסו בו.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So in listening, so in listening to this, one of the things that comes clear from the Hebrew is this very consistent contrast between the entire poem is about the contrast between the wicked and the righteous. And Roxanne has been blowing up my comments all week. And with the challenge of like, do we really know in the end who is the righteous and who is the wicked? Especially when we live in a world where people don't agree on who's righteous and who's wicked. You know, the heroes, one person has a picture of this person on the wall, another person has a picture of this person on the wall, and some people regard this person as a hero, and other people regard this person as a hero. And and there is I'm not going to call it a moral relativism, but there is a kind of there's a wide disagreement in the world about about who's right and who's wrong. It's not like it's not like the old cowboy movies that I watched as a kid, where you had the black hats and the white hats, and you always knew who the good guys, who the good guys were. Um, and who the good guys were, and and who the bad guys were. The world doesn't work that way. Um, but I think part of what David HaMelech is trying to do here, what King David is trying to do, is to give us a kind of picture of what it means to be righteous, and what it means to be a good person. And I think that in itself is I think it's very healthy. I think it's very healthy. Mariam noticed that the language sounds a lot like Arabic. Well, there's a good reason for that, because the language is a lot like Arabic. It's, of course, Hebrew is a Semitic language, very closely related to Arabic. If I could, if your Arabic is good, we could probably march you through a lot of these poems, and you would be able to kind of figure out the words, or would be able to kind of give them to you. And every once in a while, I'll do that. If I happen to know the word in Arabic, I'll share that. But it is quite similar, and there are many different styles. There are many different styles of reciting psalms, and they oh, somebody's and they vary sometimes regionally. Um, so if you heard the Syrian style, if you hear a Syrian style, that's going to sound more Arabic. If you hear Moroccan style, it's going to sound kind of Andalusi. So there's all sorts of you can also if you check on YouTube, um, you can probably even hear the Bombay style. There's actually an Indian style of reading Tehillim, which is pretty interesting. Um, so there are all sorts of different styles. Okay,
Yeah, this style is learned from the Syrian tradition. Not that I learned it directly from, but from a
right.
teacher who learned it from the Syrian tradition.
Right. So we heard a Syrian rendition, and so that's going to sound more sort of classically. The Syrian sounds tend to be kind of more classically Arabic sounding, for example, than the Moroccan, which tends to sound a little bit more Spanish, Andalusi. Okay. So we'll continue, and I think we left off on verse 17. So, um, where of course we're again this contrast between the wicked and the righteous. Okay, Kizraot Rashayim Tishavarna says, because the arms of the wicked will be broken. V'somech tzadikim Adonai says, whereas God supports the righteous. God supports the righteous. So it's the and whenever we talk about, these, the arms being broken, we mentioned before that these are arms that are being used to pull bows, right? And we said before, they pull the bows, but the arrows strike themselves, right? That's what it said before. They pull the bow, and the arrow strikes themselves, and even their arms will break, but God supports the righteous. So Yadeh Adonai Yemei Timimim. It says God knows the days of the simple. The word tamimim, tam, to be tam, um, means to be simple, means to be wholehearted. And this is one of the great spiritual goals, right? One of the great spiritual goals is not to be sophisticated or complex, uh, but to be simple with God, to be somebody who's straightforward, somebody who's wholehearted, who doesn't have a lot of ulterior motives, and God recognizes, says, and says Yodea, we and whenever and when we say when we say that somebody knows something, that knowing, as I mentioned many times before, is an intimate kind of knowing, right? The first time it's used in the Torah is when Adam knows Eve, right? Which is a description of their relationship, right? So people understand it to be it's a euphemism for their physical intimacy. But more than that, it means that to know someone or something deeply. So God knows deeply, right? God knows deeply the days, the the ways in which the tamimim, the way in which the simple spend their lives. They understand. He knows the time of their lives. Nachlatam leolam tiyeh. And it says the reward lasts forever. Their inheritance lasts forever. What it is they get from Hashem, it can never be touched. Lo yevoshu be'ed ra'ah. They don't feel shame in bad times. And it's interesting, you know, nobody can promise you that you're not going to have bad times. That's not reasonable, right? It's not, it, it, it's not possible. We all have bad times. That's part of the nature of human life is that we suffer, right? We have family problems, we have health problems, we have financial problems. All of those things are realities. But the feeling of shame is something which is completely different. Um, our circumstances, that's something we have very little control over. And that those things are going to change all the time. But here it says that a person who's trusting in God, even if they're experiencing bad times, it says they're not going to feel that sense of embarrassment. Uviyamei ra'avon yizba'u. And it says, and in days of hunger, they'll be satisfied. Now, satisfied doesn't mean you can say, okay, I'm satisfied. Oh, okay. Everybody else is going to be starving, right? There's a famine. Everybody else is going to be starving, and the people who are righteous, okay, they're going to have plenty to eat. We know that's not the reality. We know that's not what happens, right? That doesn't happen. If everybody is starving, they're starving too, but they may still feel a sense of satisfaction. It says that they'll be satisfied. They're not going to feel this is unfair. How could this happen to me? Right, that sense of embarrassment, that sense of dissatisfaction, right? That's not what they're going to be experiencing. So part of being a tam, part of being somebody who is simple with God, somebody who is straightforward with God, is that when uh, things are bad, we're not embarrassed. When things are bad, we try our best to be satisfied with what it is that that we have. Feel free, by the way, to interrupt me at any time, because otherwise I will just keep talking and talking and talking and talking until you all fall asleep. So feel free to interrupt me in any way that you want. You can wave, you can put those little hands up, you can scream out loud, whatever you want to do, but you
Uh,
feel free to interrupt me at any time.
I want to take the scream out loud approach to discussion. At what point are there limits to what I have to accept? For example, let's say I live in a kingdom and the king is a despot.
Yes.
And because he's a despot, my life is miserable and I'm suffering.
Yeah.
And do I have to accept it and say it's the will of God? Or am I supposed to look at it and say, this is a challenge for me to do the right thing and replace a despot with a more righteous king?
Well, so I was having this discussion with somebody earlier in the week. Um, with things which are circumstantial, with things over which you have no control, right? Then you trust in God, right? With things over which, right? So when it comes to the weather, you have no control over the weather. When it comes to the economy, you basically have no control over the economy. Somebody does, maybe somewhere, but not you, right? When it comes to a lot of basic things where we have no control, that's the area in which we trust God. But then we also have to remember that there's an area in which God trusts us, right? We're on this planet as God's viceroys, so to speak. We're on this planet as God's as part of the repair of the world, as part of the completion of the world, right? We weren't just created for nothing, right? We were created to serve God, and part of serving God is improving his world. So he entrusts us with things. He entrusts us with our children, right? With raising our children. He entrusts us with our relationships with other people. He entrusts us with all sorts of things. And so those things, we can't say, I trust in God for those, because he's trusting in us for those. Right? When it comes to our ethical decisions, he's trusting in us. We can't put it back on him. We can't now turn to him and say, "Oh, okay, it's not my problem, it's your problem." No, it's not. He made that our problem. So in the case of the despot, if there's nothing you can do, right? For whatever reason, there's nothing you can do. Okay, then trust in God. But if there's something that you can do, right, and you can make your life better, and you can make the life better of people around you, then that means that it's been put on you to do, right? And now God is trusting I fix it. If I hope that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, it's so Malka pointed out a nice thing. So
Well, you can say it.
well, what?
I think Aaron wants to say something.
Okay, Aaron.
It just reminded me of the scene in Fiddler on the Roof, the movie, where they say, "Is there a blessing for the czar?" And the rabbi says, "Oh, may God bless and keep the czar far away from us."
Right. Well, I mean, okay, so that's a very good, that's actually a very interesting point. So it's a very interesting point, right? We know that there's a commandment, right, to pray, right? There's a commandment to pray for the leader of your country, right? Now, you can find, you can find old prayer books that have prayers for, for Franz Josef, for the Tsar, for there's even one for Adolf Hitler when he was first chancellor, right? I mean, and you say to yourself, well, that's crazy, of course. And of course, this was established by the rabbis at the time of the Romans, and God knows the Romans were no great sheikhs, right? And they're making a prayer for Caesar. So what's the point of that? Well, because without government, people would eat each other alive. So there is a way in which even tyrannical government is better than no government. So God bless the Tsar and keep him far away from us. So two things in the notes. Malka noticed that these words, right, the Rasha and Tam, are actually used as part of the Passover Seder, right? We have two children. One of them is called the Rasha, the evil one, and one is called the Tam, the simple one, right? That's interesting. Yeah, it is interesting. And I think that it's definitely appropriate to now to go back, to Passover and think, okay, so now, like, what is it calling about? What does that Tom really mean? Because we often think of it as a Tom simple. They don't know, they're sort of dumb. They don't really know what to say, but maybe there's something else going on there. Maybe it means that they're open-minded. Maybe it means that they're kind of they're intentionally not sophisticated in their approach to God. So Mariam commented, an Urdu poet, I wonder if that must be Iqbal. I feel like it has to be Iqbal, but I'm not sure which Urdu poet it was, but I'm going to guess it was Iqbal. Said God doesn't help themselves, so doesn't help those who don't help themselves. Well, that's a paraphrase. That's actually a paraphrase of the Quran, right? The Quran doesn't say that. There's a verse in the Quran that says that that God doesn't change a people until they've changed what's in themselves. So this this idea of, you know, kind of having to transform yourself in order to transform society is certainly there. Okay. So
Just
now,
in-
yeah.
say, as far as praying for the tyrant or the leader that you don't like, I mean, at the very least, wouldn't you pray for wisdom that they would change? I mean,
You're trying,
if you want things to change, I mean, you're not going to pray for them to have misery. You might pray for them to have wisdom or something. I don't know.
so leave it to Roxanne to try to find wiggle room. Okay. You try to, okay. Yes, you can.
That's
Yeah.
why we're troublemakers.
Sure. No, I think that, you know, listen, you can pray for somebody. You can pray for somebody's wisdom for sure. Okay. I got it right on the Iqbal. I'm impressed with myself. Okay, good. Um, right. I mean, you know, uh, I'm sure everybody's praying for the Prime Minister of Canada. Okay. Okay, now we're gonna get to the wicked. I know you guys just waiting. You're just waiting for the wicked. Kirashaim Yovedu, because the wicked will be destroyed. It's not just die out. I mean, it's Yovedu is really, you know, destroyed. They're gonna be wiped out. Ve'oivei Hashem kikar karim kula ve'ashan kalu. There's a word here which nobody seems to know exactly what it means, to be quite honest with you. I looked at the commentaries and nobody offered anything that was very impressive. But I'll just take the translation as it is. The wicked die out. God's enemies are like light that flashes, disappears on the plain. They utterly vanish in smoke. I'm sort of the image that I'm seeing, and I looked at this, I looked at the commentaries, and none of them was giving me anything that sounded that was making perfect sense to me. But I'm sort of imagining if you've ever lived in California or by the coast, and in the morning the marine layer kind of rests over the earth, right? And you kind of wake up in the morning and there's this kind of there's this steamy mist over everything, and then gradually it just kind of disappears, and it looks very substantial, right? It looks very substantial. In fact, it can look so substantial that you can imagine that you could kind of hold it. You know, it looks very substantial, and then it just disappears. It just kind of dissipates over the course of a couple of hours. And I think that's the image here of Kalu. It says Kalu be'ashan Kalu. It says it just utterly vanishes in the smoke. It just kind of disappears and goes away. So the wicked, so the wicked don't leave behind anything of anything of lasting value. It says Lovei rashav lo yishalem. The wicked borrow and do not give back. You know, I often think that there are like two kinds of people in the world. There are people who are givers and there are people who are takers. Right? This is the best image of a taker, right? It's the person who borrows but never gives anything back. Right? They just take and take and take and take. He says with tzaddik, but the righteous one, chonen v'noten, is gracious and gives. And chonen, that word that we've used many variations on that word, comes from chen or grace, is something that you do for nothing, right? It's not quid pro quo, right? It's not just, that somebody borrows and gives back. That makes you a decent person. Okay, that makes you, you're a decent person. A decent person borrows something and gives back. It's normal, right? A person who borrows and doesn't give back, that's pretty bad, right? That's obnoxious, right? That's bad. But the tzaddik, right, the person who's really righteous, says they give for nothing. They give because they want to give. They give because, for Kaylin, not for the stars, right? Not because they're going to get some kind of credit for it, not because there's not because you're getting brownie points in heaven, but because they do it out of graciousness. He says, "Ki mivorachav yirshu haaretz." It says those that God blesses will inherit the earth. This is like a Hebrew tongue twister. Kolalav yikaretu. He says, and his curses, and he curses, and those he curses will be cut off. And yikaretu, to be cut off, is a karet. To be cut off is one of the most sad and hideous kinds of punishments, because it's we have all these punishments in Jewish law, some of which are really quite horrible. I'm not going to share them because whatever, but we have some capital punishments which are pretty bad. Okay, and the capital punishments that people have come up with, right? Everything from the guillotine to the electric chair. We have such creative ways of executing each other. But this one, karet, means to be cut off from God, right? To have the cord between you and God cut off, and the sadness in that is it's something we can't even imagine, because we don't really understand how we're connected to God. We don't really understand our own connection, so we can't even imagine what it is to be disconnected. But that's what happens, right? That's what happens to those. That's the curse of God, right? What's the blessing of God? The blessing of God is that you inherit the earth. A blessing of God is that you get to live in this world, right? You get to live in this world, and this is your field in which you get to do all the great stuff that people get to do in the world, and you get to do it honestly and with simplicity and straightforwardness and all that great stuff. And what's the curse of God? The curse of God is that you live in a life of separation from Him, that you are cut off from Him. Me'adonai mitzade gever konanu. He says God secures the steps of mitzade gever. Means like a strong person. That's related to the word jabar, right? It's a jabar, majbur, right? That's the same. A J and a G so a J in Arabic, right? If you went to Egypt, right? The J becomes a G, right? That's why you have, so you can have so if your name was Jabbar, Al-Jabbar, right? Be Al-Gabar. If you're in Egypt, and so Gever is from that same verb. So that means somebody who is strong. So for the person who is strong, right? God secures his steps, but Darko Yehpat, and He's pleased by His way. And yechpatz is a beautiful word, right? It's a beautiful word. It's pleasing to God. We forget that sometimes. We forget that. There we go. Noor, thank you so much. We got it. As we have, see, I love this. We have so you can check that out right there in the chat, our little etymology there. So it's important that what we do. But okay, so by the way, for your Arabic friends, okay, so the word derech, darko, is tariq, right? Derech, tariq, same, right? Also means path or a way. Okay, so if he's so kiyipo, if he begins to fall, lo yutal, he's not let go. I think of those. I don't know if you've ever done those weird things that they do at work. You know, where they have these like group trust building activities where you fall back into somebody's hands, right? You have to kind of trust the person behind you, right? Usually it's some coworker who you never met before, right? And you have to trust them, and you fall back into their arms, and supposed to build trust and things like that, or rope courses and things like that, where people have to work together to solve problems and things like that. But here it's like he begins to fall, but he's not abandoned. God supports his hand. It's like, of course we fall, right? Again, there's no promise that you're not going to fall. There's no promise you're not going to have a bad time, but there's a promise that you don't have to experience shame and humiliation. There's no promise that you're not going to there's no promise that you're not going to be poor. Right? There's no promise that you're not going to be poor, and then you're not going to suffer poverty. But there's the possibility that you could be satisfied even with what you have. There's no promise that you're not going to fall, because everybody falls, right? Everybody falls. But there is the promise that you don't have to fall completely, and that God can hold you up. He says, Ki Hashem somechi ado. He says, and literally, he kind of like lets you lean on his, kind of supports your hand. I don't know if you've ever seen, there's I only see it with elderly rabbis. I imagine there are other people where they kind of walk, and the other person just kind of holds their hand, and somehow or another it steadies them in such a way that they're able to kind of deal with their balance. It's like that. Nar ha'iti gam zakanti v'lo re'iti tzadik nezav v'zaro mevakesh lachem. Everybody, right? This is for all the Ashkenazim. Well, not just Ashkenazim. The Sephardim have it also. At the end of our
Chabad and some Hasidim.
what? No, right. That's right. They don't have it. That's right. They don't have it. That's true. Some Hasidim don't have it, but it comes at the end of a prayer that we say after we eat. And I remember being very puzzled by it when I first saw it, because it's really true. It says, Nar Hayiti, it says, I was once young, V'gam zakanti, and now that I've grown old. It says something about this is very, it's very nostalgic, right? It's kind of, I was old as I was young, and now I've grown old. V'lo ra'iti tzadik nezav, I've never seen a righteous person, a tzaddik, a righteous person. Also, by the way, for Arabic friends, tzaddik is tzaddik, same word, right? Tzaddik. Probably people named Tzadiki, right? It's the same word. And it says, I never saw a righteous person forsaken. It says, V'zaro mevakesh lachem. And I never saw children searching out for bread. Searching out for bread. And I always was troubled by this. I thought, come on, is this really true? Come on, is it? We know that there are people who are very righteous sometimes, who get so poor, and have to search, for bread. And I think, and I'm not the only one to notice that question, right? It's an obvious question. So there are lots of answers, and one is that the person is lo ra'iti. I never saw, right? So one interpretation is lo ra'iti tzadik nezav. I never saw anybody like this, and I never saw their children searching for bread, because I never allowed it to happen. Right? Ra'iti can also mean like I saw something, I didn't do anything about it. And so David HaMelech is saying about himself, he says, I was young and I became old, and says, and I never let a person who was righteous, I never let a person who was righteous starve. I wouldn't allow that. I wouldn't allow that to happen. That's one way of seeing it. It says ra'iti can also mean like to see not just not to see, but to notice, you know. So I didn't notice somebody who was a poor person. I didn't let tzaddik, a righteous person. I didn't let them be abandoned. I didn't let their children have to go off searching for bread. That's one way to understand it. Another way to understand it is, again, there's no promise you're not going to be. There's no promise you're not going to be poor. There's no promise you're not going to suffer. But what righteousness buys you, so now I'm talking transactionally. Okay, I'm not sure I want to do that, but it is dignity, right? Is you're not gonna you're not gonna lose your dignity. It says Kol Hayom Chonen. He's gracious at all times, umalveh, and he lends vizaro levracha. It says, and charity he sows is a blessing for him. So now, so it's interesting. So that really relates. So that's the reason why people say lo ra'iti, I didn't see, right? I didn't see a poor person, because now he's talking about charity, and so he says, so because the person who's righteous, was always gracious, was always lending. But it's interesting. It says lending and not giving. It's a higher level, right? It's a higher level to lend to a person than to give to a person. Because when you lend to a person, right, without interest, when you lend to a person, you allow them to preserve their dignity. Right? So even if you give them lots of time to pay you back, you give them very good conditions and whatever else to pay you back, whatever, in small amounts, whatever, it's better to be a loved, to be a person who lends, even than a person that gives, because that allows the person to preserve their dignity. There's a certain indignity in receiving a gift from somebody that you become beholden to them. And so to lend is better. So he lends to the poor, vizaro livracha. Okay, and the charity that he sows is a blessing for him. By the way, this is probably where those preachers, right? Where those preachers get that they talk about seed faith, plant the seed, right? You know, using charity to plant the seed, but they're imagining that it's going to grow into more money, right? Here it doesn't say that at all. It says that zaro l'bracha. He says it's a seed for blessing, but it doesn't say whether that blessing is material or a spiritual blessing. And so in the chat, Mariam said the tzaddik person will be rich in other way for being righteous. There's wealth of faith, absolutely. And tzedakah, right? Hebrew word, tzedakah, right? Same word. And it's exactly the same word, right? Charity is really a form of, right? Really a form of righteousness and faith, right? It's not just some sort of prompting of the heart in a moment, but it's something that kind of establishes, real goodness in the world.
So Avram, I'll offer something from the ArtScroll commentary. Actually, they cite Radak. Says the righteous would be. It says all in the days, even when he himself is in financial straits. So he's saying that the righteous, even when the righteous is in financial straits, he's still going to do these positive deeds and so forth.
Right. Okay. Very good. That you're not gonna cut it off because you feel you feel stressed out from financially, but you're gonna continue, right? You're gonna continue chonen, to give mercy and to lend out and to plant seeds of bracha, even if you're suffering. So it's 1:47. I don't want to go any further than that because people's attention spans tend to drift. Questions, thoughts, more thoughts? No, nothing. No, but amazing. Okay.
Maybe, the only thought I have is just kind of this, the trickiness around, giving or lending and lending, yes, that makes a lot of sense about how that is a higher form of, I guess, giving.
Right.
But then that's still not, you might not be paid back still, and then maybe you start feeling resentful, and then you just want to give it all away, or at least I'm speaking, I just, just give.
Yeah,
without-
well, you have to be, you have to be really careful, and you have to really know yourself. When you lend, so for the other person you're this is just my personal advice because I've been in this position many times. When you lend, you have to have in mind that you're giving because you
Right.
really don't know that you're going to get paid back. It's not,
Right,
it's right. And because there are circumstances, whatever, and you also have to be prepared not to behave like a lender. This is sort of, so w- you know, so you're going to behave like a giver, right? And you're going to be prepared to lose the money. You're going to be prepared to lose, although it's interesting, just so you know, they did a study some years ago of these kind of free loan societies, where they give out. There's a lot of Jewish communities have free loan societies where they give out interest-free loans. Usually not huge loans, but small loans for weddings and things like that for people, or to people like for a down payment on a house or something like that, where you want to do that. And they found that for the most part, they get paid back. Now that doesn't always work. I mean, there've been, sometimes, there have been loan societies that have gone out of business because they just didn't get paid back. But for the most part, people pay back. So, Malka, you have a question?
I was just gonna add on to that on top of the resentment that was just brought up about like you as the lender or the giver, there's also the person that you're giving to, where before we were talking about how it's dignity, that they don't have to feel like they're just this pity case, that they're saying no, you can pay me back in time. But there's also kind of the guilt that they feel when they're thinking, oh, it might be a long time, and when this goes, my car's old, and probably by the time I have, or for example, by the time I have money to pay you back, then something else is, so I almost feel like the solution might be to say to the person, if you pay me back, I'll be pleasantly surprised, but I'm not expecting it. And I don't mean it in a bad way. I mean it I would rather you spend the money if you need it. And,
Right.
and that way there's kind of this relieving them of it weighing on their shoulders. And it's always in the back of their mind that, oh, I owe them, to kind of get that out of the way.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of ways of handling it. Miriam, you had a thought? Miriam.
Yes, I also just want to comment one thing, that today I learned that taking interest on the loan is also forbidden in SAMS, because we thought that it is okay with the Jewish and Christian community to take interest on the loan, because in Islam it is very, very strictly forbidden. So it's a new thing for me to know about it.
Yeah, the interesting is interesting. So in Jewish law, it's a little bit different. Okay, the way it works is like this. So I'll just actually most people don't even know about this stuff, but so riba, or what we call ribit, same word, ribit, is for sure forbidden for Jews to give or take interest to fellow Jews. Now, the question about whether you can give it to non-Jews, right? So what would be the difference? The difference is that it's considered to be a kind of family courtesy, because when I lend out money, I'm actually losing money, right? When I lend out money, I'm actually losing money because that money is no longer making money for me, right? I can't invest it, I can't buy anything with it, I can't do anything with it, so I'm losing money. So the idea is, okay, for my family members, so to speak, I have to, right, for my family members, I have to, I can't ask interest because I shouldn't be benefiting from their poverty. I shouldn't be benefiting from their need, right? And I don't want to be in the habit of benefiting from their need. But when it's just business, right? If it's just business and it's between me and somebody who is not part of my community, then okay, maybe I can take interest. But then even still, right? There's a limit on the amount of interest I can take, right? So I can't take an unreasonable interest. I can take a market rate interest. But then, right? But then there's also a question of like, who is my, who is my family? So for example, right, there were rabbis in the Middle Ages who said, wait a second now, Jews, Muslims and Christians, right? They're also people of, they're also people of religion. They're also people who are, who are kind of working for the world in the same way you are. So maybe all those financial rules that apply to you would also apply to them, right? So maybe you can take interest. So there's lots of different opinions, and the general opinion is that for sure Jews can't take interest themselves. They could take reasonable interest, market interest, from others, but not excessive. You're not supposed to look. Obviously, it's a character issue also. Okay? You're not supposed to want to make money off of somebody else's needs, right? You can recover your loss, right? You can make sure that you don't lose out, but it doesn't make you a very good person, to figure out, okay, I'm gonna, somebody else is in need, somebody else has got a problem, they can't pay their electric bill. Like these, in America, we have a thing called paycheck loans. We have paycheck loans, okay, which are unbelievable, right? If you can't pay your, let's say your paycheck doesn't come till Monday and you have to pay your electric bill on Friday, you go to one of these places, they give you a loan for crazy interest, right? For absolutely crazy interest. Always in the poorest of the poor. Look at the poorest neighborhoods in America, these places. And of course, it's a horrible ripoff. They're taking advantage of people who are in real trouble, and nobody wants anything like that. Okay, so so you have to be really careful with the interest thing. How that's allowed, by the way, I don't understand. It's the most evil system ever. Yeah. I won't go on in that, but I could. Okay, more thoughts? Okay, I will release everybody. Thank you so much. And I like Linda's idea of passing the loan on. Just, I give you a loan, you have to pass it on. That was a great movie like that. What was it called?
Pay it forward.
Pay
Yeah.
It
with
Forward. Thank
that
you.
Little boy, yeah.
Yeah, I probably showed that in class once. I'd do anything to get out of teaching. Okay. Don't
Thank you for
Thank you
today.
so
What a great
much.
Thank
class.
you.
don't quote me on that. Okay. Bye-bye, guys. See you, Bezrat Hashem, some of you on Wednesday. And
Hashem.
and if not, please, if you have thoughts, comments, please feel free to tell me during the week. Everybody knows how to find me. Bye. Thank you, Noor. And
Thank
you.
you.
okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Mariam, are you Pakistani?
Yes,